The Bible illustrates ideas, principles, and events through stories, narrations that tell us of God's great love, faithfulness, care, and guidance for His people. God uses stories of great and weak men to pass important messages to His children. God's truth and ways are encoded in the stories of the lives of men and women that has lived before. One of those testimonies and great stories that tell us a lot about God's character and His relationship with His servants is the story of Elijah. To fully understand the context of this story, we have to set the scene. The kingdom of Israel was in great turmoil due to the actions of Solomon, and on the ascension of King Rehoboam after him, the kingdom of Israel was divided into two kingdoms: the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. Gradually, the two kingdoms fell into open rebellion of God, and by the time of King Ahab, altars and temples were being built to the Philistine god Baal. 1 Kings 16 verse 31. Human sacrifices and altars were built in honor of pagan gods. 1 Kings 16 verse 34. Due to all these, the sins committed by Ahab were considered worse than any of his predecessors. It was during the time of great trouble and unrest that God moved Elijah to action. Led by God, Elijah prophesied that there would not be rain until he moved to say otherwise. After this prophecy, on God's direction, Elijah had to leave home for Kerith Ravine, where God used ravens to supply him bread and meat, and the brook flowing through the ravine quenched his thirst. After the brook dried up, God directed Elijah to go to Zarephath, the region of Sidon, where he had directed a widow to feed Elijah. Elijah met the widow at the well in front of Zarephath's gate, where he asked her for some water. He also asked for some bread she did not have. The old woman responded that she did not have bread, but she had a jar of flour and some oil she was going to use to make some bread for her and her son. There and then Elijah made a prophecy to the widow that she would not run out of flour or oil until God sent the rains back. While Elijah stayed with the widow's son became ill and died. Elijah then took the child's son to the roof, where he begged God, who resurrected the widow's son. Elijah returned the boy to his mother, and the woman was amazed. God directed Elijah, who then confronted King Ahab. He tells Ahab that Ahab is the cause of all his people's problems. Elijah then proceeds to challenge Ahab to a demonstration involving the god Baal versus the God of Elijah. So Ahab summoned 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah. The prophets assembled at Mount Carmel, where Elijah addressed them and the people of Israel. 2 bulls were brought out, one for Elijah and the other for the prophets of Baal. Elijah instructed the prophets of Baal to take a bull and prepare it and put it on the wood, but not set fire to the wood. He then told them to call on their God to light up the sacrifice. The prophets of Baal agreed to this and did all that Elijah had suggested. They then called on their God from the beginning of the day until noon, and nothing happened. At midday, Elijah began to taunt the prophets, telling them to shout louder. Maybe their God was deep in thought or sleeping or busy traveling and needed to be awakened. So the prophets prayed louder. They danced harder, and they slashed themselves with knives and swords and sweat and bleed. Yet no one answered. Midday passed and evening came. Still no response. Then Elijah drew the people to him and repaired the altar of the Lord. He used 12 stones to build an altar, dug a trench around the altar, then cut up the meat, placed it on the altar, and told the people to drench it with water using 4 large jars. Then directed them to do it again, and then a 3rd time. Then Elijah stepped forward and prayed to God, and the fire of the Lord came down and burned up the sacrifice, including the wood, the soil, and the stones. Elijah then told the people to seize the prophets of Baal and slay them. After this episode on Mount Carmel, Elijah told Ahab to go and eat and drink, that the rains would come. True to Elijah's words, it rained, but Elijah was still not safe because Jezebel the king's wife had now made a vow to kill Elijah. Elijah had to flee. While fleeing, Elijah prayed he would die. Instead, after he fell asleep, God sent an angel to feed him with some bread and water to prepare for the journey ahead. Strengthened by the meal, Elijah travels for 40 days and 40 nights to a cave where he would experience God's presence. In this chapter of Elijah's story, we see God reach out to Elijah. After an earthquake, a fire came, and after the fire came a gentle whisper. Then God directed Elijah to go to the desert of Damascus and anoint Hazael as king over Aram and Jehu son of Nimshi as king over Israel. God also directed Elijah to make Elisha's son of Shaphat from Abel-Meholah his successor as a prophet. Elijah anointed Elisha as his successor, also taking Elisha as his servant in preparation for his work after he was gone. Elijah was then directed by the Spirit of God to go deliver a message to Ahab, who in the counsel of his wife had taken Naboth's vineyard for himself. God's message for Ahab was that in the same place where the dogs licked Naboth's blood, they would lick his too. After Ahab repented, God spoke to Elijah, telling him, "Have you noticed how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because he has humbled himself, I will not bring this disaster in his day, but I will bring it on his house in the days of his son." 1 Kings 21 verse 29. Later on, God led Elijah in confrontation of King Ahaziah, who was the king of Samaria. His message for the king was that the king would die. The king tried to get his soldiers and guards to bring Elijah to him. 2 captains went up, 2 captains died. The third captain went down on his knees and begged Elijah to come with him. Elijah finally went down to Ahaziah to make his prophecy. Ahaziah would die from his injuries. Finally, when God had decided to take away Elijah, he made him leave first to Bethel, then to Jericho. Elisha, Elijah's successor, stayed with him throughout the entire journey, despite Elijah's efforts to get him to leave. While on their journey, Elisha made a request of Elijah, that he would inherit a double portion of the spirit of Elijah. Finally, God sent a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and Elijah was carried up in a whirlwind. Elijah's story is one of faith, perseverance, and courage. He lived through times of great tribulation and sin, enduring the persecution of God's prophets and endless murder and violence. Yet Elijah lived by faith. He lived with the intention and direction of God. He knew God was above and beyond anything the world could throw at him. He was not strong enough on his own. He knew and admitted that. Elijah asked God to let him die. He went to let go, but ultimately trusted God's purpose for his life. Elijah's story continues to resonate with Christians years later as they navigate the trials and difficulties of life. The authorities of the world, the kings and institutions of the world, built to uphold the power of the world, will rise against you. Like Elijah faced, persecution and ill fortune might be sent your way. But God is always in charge and is above every power and principality in the world. One recurring theme in Elijah's story is the idea of God's presence. We see God's presence with Elijah always. That presence has not left us. Even as Christians in an unfriendly world, we have God's presence with us, and as such, we never have to be afraid. Even though fear wanted to get a hold of Elijah, he understood that God's presence was with him. The psalmist said, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." In trying times like this, remember that God is your shepherd. The way may not look bright ahead, but call on him. Do you feel overwhelmed and challenged by life? Call on God, just like Elijah did. A lot of his story can be found in the book of 1 Kings 17, 18, 19, and 21, and 2 Kings 1 and 2. We hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe for more videos on Christian living, perspectives, and faith. Like and share as well. Once again, thanks for watching. Till next time, have a blessed day.